Glenn Adam had rehearsed his divorce speech in the shower, in the car, even in front of the bathroom mirror, but he never once practiced looking his wife in the eye while destroying her world. The penthouse smelled like the lavender candles Jenna always burned on Sunday evenings. Glenn hated that smell now. It reminded him of routine, of predictability, of a life that had somehow become too small for the man he believed he was becoming. He stood in the center of their living room, leather messenger bag already packed and waiting by the door, divorce papers folded neatly in his jacket pocket. Jenna walked in from the kitchen, still wearing the reading glasses she used when she was deep into one of her books. She looked comfortable, content, completely unaware that her husband had already left her weeks ago in every way that mattered. "We need to talk," Glenn said, and even he could hear how badly he'd stolen that line from 1,000 movies. She set down her mug of tea. Something in his voice made her fold her hands in her lap, like she was preparing for bad news from a doctor. "Okay." Glenn pulled out the papers. This was it, the moment he'd been planning for months. Freedom, a fresh start, a life where he wasn't tied to decisions he'd made when he was too young to know better. "I'm filing for divorce," he said, trying to sound gentle but firm. "This isn't about you. It's about me. I need to find myself again. I need to be free." The words sounded hollow even as they left his mouth, but he pushed forward. He'd prepared for this. He'd gone over every point with his lawyer, rehearsed every line. "We got married too young," he continued, watching her face for reaction. She gave him nothing, just those dark eyes watching him like she was seeing something he couldn't. "We've grown into different people. You're wonderful, Jenna. You really are. But I can't keep pretending we're still those kids who fell in love. I need space to figure out who I am without us." "Without us," she repeated softly. "Is there someone else?" Glenn felt his jaw tighten. He'd prepared for this question too. "There's someone I've been talking to. Nothing physical happened while we were together. But yes, I've been spending time with someone who makes me feel alive again." "How long?" "That's not important." "How long, Glenn?" He shifted his weight. "A few months. But like I said, nothing happened until I made the decision to leave. I'm not a cheater." Jenna almost smiled at that. Almost. "You're not a cheater. You just emotionally invested in another woman for months, planned a divorce in secret, and now you're standing in our home telling me about it after all the decisions are already made. But you're not a cheater." "Don't make this ugly," Glenn said, his voice hardening. "I'm trying to do this right. My lawyer will be fair about the assets. You'll be taken care of." "Your lawyer will be fair," she said, still in that same quiet voice. "How generous." "Jenna, please. We can both walk away from this with dignity if you don't fight me." She stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked out at the city lights spread below them like scattered diamonds. Glenn watched her shoulders, waiting for them to shake with crying. They didn't. "Who is she?" Jenna asked. "Her name is Britt. She's young and exciting, and she makes me feel like anything is possible. She doesn't look at me like I'm a paycheck or a status symbol. She sees me." "She's young," Jenna repeated. "How young?" Glenn's silence was answer enough. Jenna turned around, and he was surprised to see no tears on her face. Just something harder, something that looked almost like disappointment mixed with pity. "You practiced this speech," she said. "You stood in front of a mirror somewhere and practiced breaking my heart like it was a business presentation. That's not fair." "No, Glenn. What's not fair is that you made me believe we were building something together while you were already shopping for the exit. What's not fair is that you're calling this freedom when what you really mean is you found someone with tighter skin and lower expectations. You're being cruel." "I'm being honest. Something you stopped doing months ago." She walked past him toward their bedroom. "Leave the papers on the table. I'll have my lawyer contact yours." Glenn felt something like relief mixed with unexpected irritation. She wasn't supposed to be this calm. "That's it? No screaming? No begging me to stay?" Jenna stopped in the doorway and looked back at him. really looked at him for the first time since he'd started talking. You want me to beg? Is that what would make you feel better about this? Would it help you believe you're doing something brave instead of something pathetic? I'm not pathetic. I'm taking control of my life. No, baby, you're running away from it. But go ahead, be free, find yourself. See if that girl waiting in your car downstairs is still interested when there's nothing left to impress her with. Glenn's eyes widened. How did you know? Your phone pinged 20 minutes ago with a text that said, "Outside waiting, babe." You left it on the counter when you went to get your prepared speech papers from wherever you were hiding them. She smiled then, and it was the saddest smile he'd ever seen. You're not even good at this, Glenn. You're just convinced you are. He grabbed his bag from by the door, angry now, angry that she wasn't falling apart, angry that she was making him feel small when he was supposed to feel liberated. Sign the papers, Jenna. Let's both move on with our lives. Oh, I'm going to move on, she said quietly. Trust me on that. He walked out, pulling the door closed behind him with more force than necessary. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. Britt was waiting in his car, music playing, her phone out recording what she probably thought was a romantic moment. Young and exciting and making him feel alive. Everything Jenna had stopped being. How did it go? Britt asked, touching his arm with fingers that felt too light, too temporary. It's done, Glenn said, starting the car. I'm finally free. She squealed and kissed his cheek, already posting something about new beginnings. Glenn drove away from the building where he'd lived for 8 years, and with every mile he felt lighter. No more expectations, no more routine, no more looking at a woman who knew every single one of his flaws and loved him anyway despite them. He was free. Back in the penthouse, Jenna stood in the silence for a long moment. Then she walked to her laptop, opened it, and made a phone call. The person answered on the first ring. It's time, she said, her voice ice-cold, calm. Move everything. The person on the other end asked a question. No, Jenna said. He doesn't know anything yet. He will soon enough. Make sure everything is dated properly. Make sure there's no room for questions. And get me Lawrence Kincaid. I need the best. She hung up, picked up the divorce papers Glenn had left on the table, and read through them carefully. Community property. Equal division, his lawyer being fair. She set them down and laughed once, a sound with no humor in it whatsoever. Glenn Adam thought he was walking away from a comfortable life into something exciting. He had no idea he'd just walked away from a fortune that would have set his grandchildren's grandchildren up for life. He had no idea that while he was rehearsing his freedom speech, Jenna had been making phone calls of her own. He had no idea that the wife he'd just thrown away was about to become the wealthiest woman he'd ever known. And by the time he figured it out, it would be far too late to take back a single word of that speech he'd practiced so carefully. Jenna looked at her reflection in the dark window and barely recognized the woman staring back, but she knew one thing for certain. That woman was done being underestimated. Chapter 2. The Courtroom Bomb. The courtroom smelled like old wood and broken promises, and Glenn Adams sat there like a man who'd already won before the game started. His lawyer, Richard Browning, had the kind of confidence that came from winning too many times. He sat with his leather briefcase open, files organized with color-coded tabs, every document where it needed to be. Glenn himself wore his best suit, the one that made him look like old money even though he'd built everything himself. Or so he told people. Jenna sat across the aisle with her lawyer, a woman Glenn didn't recognize. She'd refused his offer to recommend someone from his network. Stubborn until the end. She looked different. Hair pulled back severe, wearing a black suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Maybe she was. The funeral of their marriage. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Judge Linda Hawthorne, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen every trick in the book. She sat, reviewed the files in front of her, and began. This is the dissolution of marriage between Glenn Adam and Jenna Sandler Adam. I've reviewed the preliminary filings. Mr. Browning, you may proceed. Richard stood, smoothing his tie. Your Honor, this is a straightforward division of marital assets. My client has been more than generous in his proposal. The marriage lasted 8 years, there are no children, and both parties are in agreement that the relationship has reached its natural conclusion. We're proposing a 50-50 split of all marital assets, which total approximately $50 million in combined value. The judge looked at Jenna. Mrs. Adam, you're represented by Lawrence Kincaid. A man stood from beside Jenna. He was older, black with grey at his temples and a reputation that made lawyers in 4 states nervous. Glenn felt his first flutter of concern. Lawrence Kincaid didn't handle routine divorces. I am, Your Honor, Lawrence said, his voice deep and measured. Mr. Kincaid, does your client contest the asset division? We do not contest Mr. Adams' accounting of his assets, Your Honor. However, we do need to address a significant omission in the financial disclosures. Richard frowned. There are no omissions. We've been completely transparent. Mr. Browning is correct about his client's transparency regarding Mr. Adams' assets, Lawrence said. However, he seems to have forgotten to ask about Mrs. Adams' assets. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Adam has separate assets to declare. She does, Your Honor, substantial ones. Glenn leaned forward. What was this? Jenna had nothing. She'd been working part-time at a non-profit, had a small savings account, maybe some retirement funds. Nothing that would require Lawrence Kincaid. Lawrence pulled out a folder and approached the bench. Your Honor, I'm submitting documentation regarding an inheritance that became official several weeks ago. Mrs. Adams' grandmother, Margaret Sandler, passed away approximately 3 months ago. Due to complications in probate and challenges from other family members, the will was only recently executed and assets transferred. The judge took the documents, reading carefully. Her expression changed. This shows Mrs. Adam inherited the entirety of her grandmother's estate. Yes, Your Honor. Margaret Sandler was the founder of Sandler Properties Group, one of the largest private real estate holdings in the country. The estate's value has been independently assessed at $2.1 billion. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Glenn felt the blood drain from his face. His ears started ringing. Richard turned to look at him, eyes wide. Did you know about this? No, Glenn whispered. She never said anything. Her grandmother, they didn't even talk. They were estranged for years. The judge set down the documents. Mr. Browning, this changes the financial landscape considerably. Mrs. Adams' inheritance technically occurred during the marriage. Richard stood, his confidence evaporating. Your Honor, we need to request a recess. We need time to review this information and consult with our client. How much time do you need? At least a week, Your Honor. Judge Hawthorne looked at Lawrence. Mr. Kincaid, do you object to a continuance? We do not, Your Honor. My client is in no rush. We simply wanted the court to be aware of all assets in play before any agreements were finalized. Very well. We'll reconvene in 1 week. Both parties are to submit complete financial disclosures, including all inherited assets, their dates of transfer, and current valuations. Mr. Adam, I strongly suggest you have a conversation with your attorney about community property laws. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. Glenn couldn't move, couldn't think. $2 billion. Jenna, his Jenna who he'd left with divorce papers and a speech about freedom. Richard grabbed his arm. We need to talk, now. They found an empty conference room down the hall. Richard closed the door and rounded on Glenn. Did she know? When you filed, did she know about this inheritance? I don't know. How would I know? We weren't exactly talking about her family. They'd been estranged since before I met her. The timing here is catastrophic, Glenn. Catastrophic. You filed 6 weeks ago. This inheritance was finalized several weeks ago. If she knew when you filed, or even if she suspected it was coming, you might have a case for renegotiation. But if this was a complete surprise to her too, Then it doesn't matter. It happened during the marriage. It's community property. Glenn's mind was racing, but she didn't earn it. It was given to her. There has to be a way to exclude it. Inherited assets during marriage are tricky. Some states exclude them, some don't. We're in a state that considers them marital property unless they're specifically designated otherwise in a prenuptial agreement. Richard paused. Did you have a prenup? No, we were young, in love. We didn't think we needed one. Of course you didn't. Richard ran his hand through his hair. Okay, we need to find out exactly when she found out about this inheritance. If there's any evidence she knew about it and didn't disclose it during the filing, we might have grounds for fraud. Jenna wouldn't commit fraud. Glenn, she just walked into a courtroom knowing she's a billionaire and let me spend 20 minutes talking about splitting your $50 million like it mattered. She knew exactly what she was doing. This was theater. Glenn thought back to that night in the penthouse, the way she'd been so calm, the way she'd told him to have his lawyer contact hers, the way she'd said, "I'm going to move on," like it was a promise instead of a platitude. She'd known. She'd stood there and let him give his whole speech about freedom and finding himself, and she'd known the entire time that she was about to become a billionaire. "I need to talk to her," Glenn said. "Absolutely not. You don't talk to her without me present. You don't text her, you don't call her, you don't go anywhere near her. Do you understand me? Any communication could be used against us." Against us? Richard, she's my wife. She's your soon-to-be ex-wife who's worth $2 billion that you just filed to divorce. She's not on your side anymore, Glenn. She's the opposition. Glenn walked out of the conference room in a daze. He made it to his car before the full weight of what had just happened hit him. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to Britt's number, then stopped. He couldn't tell her about this. She'd been posting about their relationship online, calling him her successful entrepreneur boyfriend, living for the lifestyle his money provided. His money, $50 million that had seemed like a fortune until about an hour ago. He scrolled to Jenna's number instead, started typing a message, deleted it, started again. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the inheritance. Can we talk?" He hit send before he could stop himself. The response came back almost immediately. "Your lawyer told you not to contact me. Listen to your lawyer, Glenn. It's the smartest thing you've done in months." He stared at the message, reading it over and over. There was no anger in it, no emotion at all, just a simple statement of fact. She knew Richard would tell him not to contact her. She knew Glenn would do it anyway. She knew everything. And Glenn realized with a clarity that felt like ice water in his veins that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd rehearsed walking away from Jenna Sandler. He'd practiced leaving her behind. He'd convinced himself he was trading up, moving forward, becoming the man he was always meant to be. Instead, he'd walked out on $2 billion and the only woman who'd ever loved him when he had nothing. His phone buzzed. Another message from Jenna. "By the way, Glenn, I didn't know about the inheritance when you left. I found out the same day I got served with divorce papers. Funny how things work out, isn't it? Almost like the universe has a sense of humor about people who mistake luck for intelligence." Glenn sat in his car in the courthouse parking lot and felt his perfect new life crumbling before it had even begun. Chapter 3. The Mother-in-Law's Real Face. Barbara Adam had never learned how to knock like she was asking permission. She knocked like she was announcing her arrival to people who should have been waiting for her. Jenna heard the pounding on her hotel suite door and checked her watch. Almost midnight. She'd been expecting this visit, just not quite this late. Barbara had restraint usually, at least enough to wait until morning. The fact that she was here now, at this hour, meant she was desperate. Jenna opened the door. Barbara stood in the hallway wearing a Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but her makeup was smudged around her eyes and her hair looked like she'd been running her hands through it. She pushed past Jenna into the suite without being invited. "We need to talk," Barbara said, her voice shaking. "We need to talk right now." "Hello, Barbara. Please come in," Jenna said dryly, closing the door. Barbara spun around. Don't, don't you dare act casual about this. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any idea what this is going to do to Glenn? What I've done? Jenna moved to the minibar, poured herself a glass of water. She didn't offer Barbara anything. I inherited money from my grandmother. That's what I've done. What did you think I'd done? You've destroyed my son's life. That's what you've done. He's humiliated. His business partners are pulling back. His friends are laughing at him behind his back. The press is calling him the man who divorced a billionaire for an Instagram girl. Maybe he should have thought about that before he filed the papers. Barbara's carefully constructed composure cracked. Tears started running down her face, cutting through foundation and powder. She sank onto the couch like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Please, please, Jenna. Whatever has happened between you and Glenn, think about the family. Think about everything we've built together. We didn't build anything together, Barbara. You tolerated me because Glenn wanted me. That's not the same thing. That's not true. I've welcomed you into our family. I've treated you like a daughter. Jenna sat down across from her, studied the older woman's face. Did you, though? Did you really? Of course I did. Yes, there were adjustments at first. Any mother has concerns when her son marries young. But I accepted you. I made peace with his choice. You made peace with his choice, Jenna repeated. That's an interesting way to put it. Barbara wiped at her eyes, mascara coming off on her fingers. I know Glenn hurt you. I know he handled this badly. But he's my son, Jenna. My only child. And yes, he made a mistake leaving you. But does he deserve to lose everything because of it? Does he deserve to be humiliated like this? He's not losing everything. He's keeping exactly what he brought to the marriage. $50 million is hardly poverty. 50 million compared to 2 billion. Come on, Jenna, be reasonable. You know how this looks. You know what people are saying. They're saying he's a fool. They're saying he threw away the best thing that ever happened to him. They're saying... She stopped, her hand going to her mouth. They're saying what, Barbara? Nothing, it doesn't matter. But something in the way she'd cut herself off made Jenna lean forward. No, finish what you were going to say. They're saying what? Barbara looked trapped. Just cruel things. People can be cruel when they smell failure. Finish the sentence, Barbara. The older woman's face hardened. The tears dried up like they'd never been there. Fine. You want honesty. They're saying my son is an idiot for not seeing what you really were. They're saying he got played. They're saying a smart woman always has an exit strategy and you played the long game better than anyone expected. Jenna felt something cold settle in her stomach. What I really was. That came out wrong. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. Say what you really mean, Barbara. Stop hiding behind manners and expensive suits and tell me what you actually think. Barbara stood up, and suddenly all the softness was gone. Her spine straightened, her voice went sharp. Fine. You think you've won? You think money changes what you are? You're still the black girl who trapped my son. Money doesn't change that. My husband made sure Glenn would be free of you eventually. He made sure of it. The suite went absolutely quiet. Even the sound of traffic from the street below seemed to disappear. Jenna stood slowly. What did you just say? Barbara's eyes widened, like she'd just heard her own words and realized the mistake she'd made. I didn't mean... That's not what I meant. Say it again. Say exactly what you just said about your husband making sure Glenn would be free of me. You're twisting my words. I'm upset. I'm not thinking clearly. Jenna pulled her phone from her pocket, held it up so Barbara could see the recording app was running. She'd started recording the moment Barbara came through the door. Barbara's face went white. You recorded this? You invited me in and recorded our conversation. You knocked on my door at midnight. You pushed your way into my hotel room. I recorded for my own safety. And now I have you on tape saying your husband made sure Glenn would be free of me. What does that mean, Barbara? What did your husband do? Nothing. He did nothing. I'm just talking nonsense. I'm upset and I'm not thinking straight. Your husband's been dead for 5 years. What could a dead man have possibly done to ensure Glenn would leave me? Barbara moved toward the door. I need to go. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have come here. If you walk out that door right now, I'm sending this recording to my lawyer first thing in the morning, And trust me, Barbara, Lawrence Kincaid will know exactly what questions to ask. Barbara stopped with her hand on the doorknob. Her shoulders sagged. When she turned around, all the fight had gone out of her. You don't understand. You can't understand. Then explain it to me. Barbara walked back to the couch, but she didn't sit. She stood behind it like she needed the furniture between them as protection. My husband was a good man. He provided for his family. He built something from nothing. He had strong opinions about how things should be. Strong opinions about what? About family, about legacy, about what kind of woman was appropriate for the Adam name. Barbara's voice dropped to almost a whisper. When Glenn married you, my husband was furious. He didn't say it in those words. He was too refined for that, but he didn't approve. He didn't think you were right for Glenn. Because I'm black. Because you came from nothing. No family connections, no money, no social standing. That's what he said it was about. But yes, Jenna. Yes, he didn't like that you were black. There. Are you happy? That's the truth you wanted to hear. Jenna felt like she'd been punched in the chest, but she kept her voice steady. And what did he do about it? He set up a trust fund for Glenn, a substantial one. But Glenn could only access it under specific circumstances. One of those circumstances was if he divorced you. The hotel suite seemed to tilt sideways. Jenna grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. Glenn knew about this trust. I don't know when he found out. My husband died 5 years ago. The trust was set up 7 years ago, right after you got married. Glenn might not have known about it until recently. His father's estate lawyer would have contacted him when certain conditions were met. How much is in this trust? Barbara looked at the floor. $20 million. Glenn left me for $20 million and your husband's racist approval. That's not fair. You don't know when Glenn found out. He might have been planning to leave anyway. The trust might have had nothing to do with it. Jenna walked to the door, opened it. Get out, Barbara. Jenna, please. If this comes out, it will destroy our family's reputation. My husband's legacy. Your husband was a racist who tried to pay his son to divorce me. That is his legacy. Now get out of my hotel room before I call security. Barbara walked to the door, then stopped and looked at Jenna one last time. You think you've won. You think having money makes you powerful. But you'll always be the woman who wasn't good enough for the Adam family. Money can't buy you that. Jenna smiled, and it was the coldest smile Barbara had ever seen. You're right, Barbara. Money can't buy me acceptance into your family. Lucky for me, I don't want it anymore. But you know what money can buy. The best lawyers in the country, private investigators, people who can find out every secret your family has ever kept. And starting tomorrow morning, that's exactly what I'm going to do. You're threatening me? I'm informing you. There's a difference. Now get out. Barbara left, and Jenna closed the door behind her. She stood there for a long moment, then walked to her laptop and sent the recording to Lawrence Kincaid with a message. We need to talk first thing in the morning. It's bigger than we thought. She poured herself a real drink this time, something stronger than water, and stood at the window looking out at the city. Glenn's father had set up a trust to pay his son to leave her. Glenn had known or found out and walked away for the money and his dead father's approval. She'd loved a man who'd put a price on their marriage. $20 million. That's what she'd been worth to the Adam family. $20 million to make the black girl go away. Jenna thought about the $2 billion sitting in accounts with her name on them. She thought about Glenn sitting somewhere right now, realizing what he'd lost. She thought about Barbara driving home, finally understanding that the woman she'd looked down on for 8 years was about to become more powerful than their entire family had ever been. And she smiled. Because Glenn and Barbara and the whole Adam family had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that because Jenna came from nothing, she'd always be nothing. They'd assumed her worth was tied to their approval, their money, their last name. They'd forgotten that sometimes the quietest person in the room is quiet because they're too busy planning to waste time talking. The recording of Barbara's confession sat in Lawrence Kincaid's inbox, waiting for morning. And when morning came, the real game would begin. Jenna raised her glass to the city lights and whispered to the ghost of the grandmother she'd never really known, "Thank you for giving me a weapon. Now watch me learn how to use it." Chapter 4. The Grandmother's Letter. Lawrence Kincaid's office looked like a place where important decisions got made and weak arguments went to die. Jenna sat in a leather chair across from his massive desk, watching him read through documents with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. He'd been her grandmother's lawyer for decades, and when Jenna had asked for representation, he'd agreed immediately. Now she understood why. He hadn't just been her grandmother's lawyer. He'd been her strategist, her confidant, and apparently the keeper of secrets that went far deeper than probate law. "Your recording of Mrs. Adams' confession is valuable," Lawrence said, setting it aside. "We can use it to establish that Glenn's decision to file for divorce was financially motivated. The trust fund his father set up creates a clear paper trail. But there's something else you need to see before we move forward." He pulled a manila envelope from his desk drawer, the kind that looked old and important. "Your grandmother left this for you. Instructions were very specific. I was only to give it to you after the divorce was filed and you'd secured representation." Jenna took the envelope. Her name was written on it in handwriting she barely recognized. She knew Glenn was going to leave me. "Your grandmother knew a lot of things. Read it. Then we'll talk about next steps." Jenna opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, 6 pages, written in the same careful handwriting. "My dear Jenna, if you're reading this, then several things have happened. I've died, which was inevitable and honestly overdue. The vultures who call themselves my relatives have fought over my estate and lost. And most importantly, that husband of yours has filed for divorce. Now, you're probably wondering how I knew Glenn would leave you. I didn't know for certain. I'm not a fortune teller. But I understand men like him. I've built my career reading people, understanding patterns. When I had Glenn investigated and discovered his father's trust fund, I knew the odds. Men who grow up with racist fathers either reject that poison or absorb it slowly. Glenn was absorbing it. I watched him at charity events over the years. Yes, I watched, though you never knew I was there. I saw how he positioned you in photos, noticed when he started introducing you differently to certain crowds. A man who's ashamed of his wife doesn't stay married when money offers him an exit. So, I didn't predict the future, Jenna. I calculated probabilities and prepared for the likely outcome. If I was wrong, if Glenn proved to be better than I thought, then you'd inherit a fortune and stay married to a good man. Win-win, but I wasn't wrong. I'm rarely wrong about people who value money over love. 6 years ago, you married Glenn Adam. I saw the announcement in the society pages. I hired investigators to look into your husband's family. What they found disturbed me. Glenn's father, Richard Adam Sr., was a man who hid his prejudices behind philanthropy and social graces. When Glenn married you, Richard was furious. Not publicly, never publicly, but he was a man who believed in bloodlines and racial purity and all the other garbage that weak men use to feel superior. Richard set up a trust fund, $20 million. Glenn could access it under 3 conditions: when he turned 45, when Richard died and Glenn had been married to an appropriate woman for 5 years, or when he divorced you. The trust document actually specifies current spouse as a condition for denial of funds. My lawyers have the original. It's as racist as it is legal. I spent my whole life building an empire. I let pride and stubbornness cost me my daughter and my relationship with you. I can't fix that, but I can give you the tools to make sure no one ever underestimates you again. Use this inheritance wisely, Jenna, not just to be rich. Any fool can be rich. Use it to be powerful. Use it to show Glenn exactly what he lost when he decided you weren't good enough for their name. Make them pay because you deserve justice. And if making them pay happens to destroy the Adam family's standing, consider that my final gift to you. Your grandmother, Margaret Sandler. P.S. Lawrence has additional files I've compiled on Glenn's family. Use them however you see fit. Jenna read the letter 3 times. Her hands were shaking by the end. Lawrence sat quietly, letting her process. She didn't know for certain, Jenna finally said. She was reading patterns, making educated guesses based on human behavior. Your grandmother understood that people are predictable when money is involved. She didn't need a crystal ball. She just needed to understand what motivated Glenn's family. This isn't love. This is strategy. With your grandmother, the two were often intertwined. Lawrence pulled out another folder. She wasn't wrong about the files. I have documentation on Glenn's family going back 3 generations. Every business dealing, every questionable decision, every secret they've tried to bury. Your grandmother was thorough. Jenna stared at the folder. Why are you giving me this? You were her lawyer. Aren't there ethics rules about this kind of thing? I was her personal attorney, not her therapist. She compiled this information legally through investigators and public records. It's yours now, part of the estate. What you do with it is up to you. He paused. Though I will say, your grandmother's instincts about people were rarely wrong. If she calculated that Glenn would choose money over you, there was good reason she was so certain. Jenna thought about the letter, about her grandmother watching her marriage from a distance for years, gathering evidence, building a case, preparing for a moment she believed would come. It was cold. It was calculating. It was probably the closest thing to love Margaret Sandler knew how to give. Glenn's trust fund, Jenna said. Can we prove he knew about it before he filed? We can prove the estate lawyer contacted him 8 months ago to inform him of the conditions. We can prove he met with that lawyer multiple times. We can't prove definitively that's why he filed for divorce, but the timeline is damning. 8 months! He's been planning this for 8 months. Jenna felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been holding on to hope that maybe Glenn had made an impulsive mistake. He looked me in the eye for 8 months, knowing he was going to leave. Men like Glenn compartmentalize well. They tell themselves stories where they're the hero. He probably convinced himself he was doing you a favor, setting you free to find someone who really loved you. Men like him are excellent at justifying their worst impulses. Jenna stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Glenn was probably with Britt, enjoying his freedom, counting on his $20 million, completely unaware of what was about to hit him. My grandmother wants me to have justice, she said quietly. Your grandmother wants you to have options. Destruction is one of them, but there are others. You could settle quietly, take your half of the community property, move on with your life. You could be the bigger person. Is that what you'd recommend? Lawrence was quiet for a long moment. My professional recommendation, take the high road. Settle quickly, keep your dignity intact, move on. My personal opinion, make him regret every single decision that led him to walk out on you. But I'm a bitter old man who's seen too many good people get destroyed by arrogant ones. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't let revenge poison it. Jenna turned back to face him. What if it's not revenge? What if it's justice? Then you better be very sure you know the difference, because from where I'm sitting, they look remarkably similar. She picked up her grandmother's letter, folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope. Glenn's father tried to buy my marriage's end. Glenn took the deal. His mother just told me I'll never be good enough for their family name. They all think I'm nothing. They all think money is the only power that matters. And now you have more money than they'll ever see. No. Now I have the resources to make sure they understand exactly what they threw away. There's a difference. She looked at Lawrence. I want to see everything you have on Glenn's family. Every secret, every shady business deal, every skeleton in every closet. I want to know everything my grandmother knew. That's going to take some time. There's a lot of material. I have time. Glenn's not going anywhere. He's too busy counting his $20 million and congratulating himself on his freedom. She smiled, and it was her grandmother's smile, the one that had terrified business rivals for decades. Let him celebrate. Let him think he got away with something, because when I'm done, He's going to realize that the worst thing he ever did wasn't leaving me. It was underestimating me. Lawrence pulled out a keycard, slid it across his desk. Your grandmother maintained an office in this building, separate from her corporate headquarters. She used it for sensitive research and private meetings. It's yours now. Everything you need is in there. Computer access, file cabinets, a safe with additional documents. The password to the computer is your birthday. Jenna took the keycard. She really did think of everything. Your grandmother didn't believe in improvisation. She believed in preparation. She spent years preparing you for this moment, even though you didn't know it. She just didn't live long enough to see it happen. Do you think she would have been proud if she could see this? Lawrence stood, walked around his desk, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression softened. Your grandmother spent her whole life building walls and pushing people away because she was too stubborn to admit when she was wrong. But in the end, she tried to give you the one thing she never had. A chance to fight back when powerful people tried to make you small. Yes, Jenna. I think she'd be very proud. Jenna left Lawrence's office with the keycard, the letter and a folder full of secrets that could dismantle a family's carefully constructed reputation. She took the elevator up 3 floors to her grandmother's private office, used the keycard, stepped inside. The office was smaller than she expected, more personal. There were photos on the wall, her grandmother receiving awards, cutting ribbons, standing in front of buildings she'd built. And in the corner, one photo that made Jenna's breath catch. Her mother, young and beautiful, standing next to Margaret Sandler in front of a house. Both of them were smiling. Jenna picked up the photo, studied her mother's face. She'd been gone for so long that Jenna sometimes forgot what she looked like. But here she was, preserved in this private office, proof that even the coldest woman in business never completely let go of her daughter. She set the photo down, booted up the computer, entered her birthday. The screen opened to folders, dozens of them, each labeled with names she recognized. Glenn Adam, Richard Adam Sr., Barbara Adam, Adam Enterprises. Her grandmother had been watching them all. Jenna opened the first file and started reading. Glenn's business practices, his partnerships, his deals, the corners he'd cut, the people he'd screwed over, the lawsuits settled quietly out of court. She read for hours, and with every page, every document, every secret uncovered, she felt her grandmother's presence in the room, a ghost with a purpose, a woman who'd failed at love but excelled at war. By the time Jenna left the office that night, she knew exactly how this was going to go. Glenn wanted his freedom and his father's money. He was going to get both, but he was also going to learn that some women don't just break when you leave them, some women break you back. And Glenn Adam was about to find out exactly which kind of woman he'd married. Chapter 5. The Girlfriend's Truth. Britt showed up at Jenna's hotel exactly when she'd said she would, which was the first surprise. Jenna had received the text that morning. I need to talk to you, please. It's important. The number wasn't saved, but Jenna knew who it was. Glenn's girlfriend. The girl who'd been waiting in the car the night he'd delivered his freedom speech. Now Britt sat on Jenna's couch, and nothing about her matched expectations. No designer clothes, no perfect makeup, no phone out. She wore jeans and a simple black sweater. She looked tired, serious, terrified. Thank you for seeing me, Britt said, her voice shaking. I wasn't sure you would. I'm not sure why I did, Jenna replied, staying standing. What do you want? Britt pulled out a folder, the movement careful. I need to show you something, but first, you need to know I'm not what Glenn thinks I am. You're his girlfriend, young, exciting, making him feel alive. No, I'm not his girlfriend, I never was. Jenna went very still. Explain that. My name is Brittany Chen. I'm a paralegal. 6 months ago, a man named David Russo hired us. He used to be Glenn's business partner. Glenn forced him out 3 years ago, used legal loopholes to claim full ownership. David lost everything. He tried to sue, but Glenn had better lawyers. And this connects to you how? David wanted evidence of fraud, but Glenn's too careful, so David hired our firm to get close another way, through me. I was supposed to be young and dumb and exactly what Glenn thinks he deserves. It worked. He ate it up. Jenna felt something cold spreading through her chest. You're telling me your entire relationship is an investigation? And I found everything. Britt handed over the folder. Glenn's been embezzling from his own company, hiding assets offshore, setting up shell corporations. He's been committing fraud for years, and I documented all of it. Jenna opened the folder. Bank statements, email threads, documents with dates that didn't match. This was everything, enough to send Glenn to prison. Why show me this? Jenna asked. Your client is David Russo. He has copies. But when your divorce made news, I realized something. A business partner claiming fraud is easy to spin. But you, the wife he abandoned, if you testify with this evidence, showing Glenn planned fraud during your marriage while divorcing you for a racist trust fund, there's no way he walks away. We bury him. Personal for who? Britt's voice went soft. My mother married a man like Glenn. Successful, charming. They were together 15 years. Then he filed out of nowhere. He'd been planning it, hiding money. By the divorce's end, my mother got nothing. She never recovered. She's still working 2 jobs. He's in a beach house with his new wife. I'm sorry that happened. I became a paralegal to stop men like that. When David approached us about Glenn, I volunteered immediately. I knew exactly what kind of man Glenn was. Jenna sat down. You played a role for 6 months. It's justice. Glenn had no idea the girl he showed off was documenting every confession about moving money, every time he bragged about outsmarting partners, every drunk admission. Did you sleep with him? Britt looked Jenna directly in the eye. No, I told him I wanted to wait until his divorce was final. He liked that. He thought it made me pure. Men like Glenn have specific fantasies. Why are you here? Because you're the wife he abandoned. If you testify, if you show Glenn planned financial fraud while divorcing you for racist money, we bury him. Legally, financially, publicly. Jenna closed the folder. You want me to help destroy the man you've been pretending to date. I want to help you make sure he pays. And if that helps David, even better. But this is your choice. You don't owe me anything, but you owe it to yourself. Why go on social media? Why post like it was real? Glenn needed to believe it. He needed to feel like he was winning. The more public, the more comfortable he got. The more he confessed. Men like Glenn can't help bragging. Jenna walked to the window. Glenn had no idea his girlfriend was a paralegal. No idea every romantic dinner had been a deposition. No idea how spectacularly he'd been played. What happens to you if I use this? Jenna asked. Glenn will come after you. Let him try. I have recordings of every conversation where he explained his fraud, text messages where he brags. If Glenn comes after me, I have enough to destroy him. Besides, I don't care what happens to me. I care that men like Glenn stop treating women like disposable accessories. Your mother would be proud. She doesn't know what I do. She thinks I'm a regular paralegal. She doesn't know I volunteer for cases like this. If she knew, she'd be horrified. She'd say I'm too angry, that revenge isn't healthy. Britt smiled sadly. She's probably right. But I can't stop. Every time I help someone like you, I imagine I'm helping her. Glenn thinks you're stupid. I know. Men like Glenn always think women like me are stupid. That's why we win. Will you testify? In court? I'll do whatever you need. I have hours of recordings, emails, banking documents. Glenn thought he was covering his tracks, but he was confessing to a witness. Jenna picked up the folder. This is going to destroy him completely. Good. Maybe the next man will think twice. That's not how men like Glenn work. They always think they're the exception. Then we'll keep catching them. Britt stood. I need to know if you're going to use this, but I understand if you want the high road. Not everyone wants to be the woman who destroys her ex-husband. Jenna thought about her grandmother's letter, the trust fund, Barbara's confession, Glenn practicing his freedom speech, 6 years of marriage to a man waiting for the right moment to leave. I'm not interested in the high road, Jenna said. I don't need to prove I'm better than Glenn. I just need to prove he made a mistake leaving me. Britt smiled genuinely for the first time. Then we're on the same team. I was getting tired of pretending to worship Glen Adam. How much longer do you have to pretend? Until divorce proceedings are over. Glen can't know what I am until after you've won. If he figures it out too soon, he'll destroy evidence, spin it. We need him comfortable, arrogant, walking into that courtroom thinking he's in control. He thinks he's going to negotiate for part of my inheritance. Let him think that. Let his lawyers prepare. Then we hit him with everything. The embezzlement, hidden accounts, fraud, the racist trust. We make sure the judge understands Glen Adam isn't a victim of bad timing. He's a calculating fraud. Jenna walked Britt to the door. Why really come here? You could have sent this through lawyers. Britt was quiet. Because you deserve to hear it from me. You deserve to know the girl your husband thought he was escaping to was the trap. And because I know what it feels like to watch someone you love choose someone else, even if it's fake. I know you've seen pictures of Glen and me. I know that hurt. I wanted you to know it was never real. Not for 1 second. It was real for him, though. Yes? And that's going to make it worse when he finds out. After Britt left, Jenna sat alone, the evidence folder on the coffee table. Glen had been planning to leave for months, and the whole time he'd been digging his own grave, confessing to a woman he thought was too young to understand. Jenna called Lawrence Kincaid. I have everything we need, she said, and it's so much worse than we thought. How bad? Prison bad. Complete destruction bad. Lawrence was quiet. Are you sure? Once we start, there's no going back. Glen won't just lose money, he'll lose everything. Jenna thought about the freedom speech, Glen walking out while Britt waited, Barbara's racism, the trust fund designed to get rid of her. Good, she said, that's exactly what I want. Then let's make sure he understands what he lost. Jenna hung up and looked out at the city. Glen thought he'd won. He thought he'd escaped into freedom. He had no idea his girlfriend was the weapon that would destroy him. No idea every intimate conversation had been recorded, documented, filed as evidence. He had no idea Jenna Sandler was about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. Never underestimate the woman you leave behind, especially when you chose money over love. Because eventually, she'll have more of both. Chapter 6. The Sister's Choice. Maya Sandler Burke showed up at Jenna's hotel at 3 in the morning with 2 kids asleep in the backseat of a car making a noise cars shouldn't make. Jenna, startled awake, pulled on clothes and ran down to the parking garage. Maya sat in the driver's seat, not crying, not speaking, just staring at the steering wheel. Maya? Jenna knocked gently. What happened? Maya unlocked the doors. Jenna slid into the passenger seat. In the back, a boy and a girl, maybe 6 and 8, slept with the abandoned piece of children who'd learned to sleep through their parents' wars. Kevin left, Maya said, her voice flat. He's been cheating for 6 months. He wants a divorce. He cleaned out our bank account. I don't have anywhere to go. Jenna felt her heart crack. How long have you been driving? I don't know. A while. I didn't know where else to go. Maya finally turned to look at Jenna and her eyes were empty. I know we haven't been close. I know I wasn't there when Glen left. I just didn't know where else to go. You came to the right place. Come on, let's get the kids upstairs. They carried the sleeping children to Jenna's suite, put them in the bedroom. Maya stood in the living room like she didn't know what to do with her hands, her body, the fact that her life had just fallen apart. Sit down, Jenna said gently. I'm making tea. I don't want tea. I want my life back. You're not an idiot. You're a person whose husband lied. Maya finally sat, and once she started talking, everything came out. Kevin had been distant for months. She'd thought it was work stress. Turns out it was his secretary. He'd been moving money out of their joint account, planning this exit while she took care of his kids, cooked his meals, believed they were building something. I have nothing, Maya said. No savings, no job, nowhere to live. You have me, Jenna said quietly, and I have enough money to make sure you and those kids never worry about Kevin again. Maya looked up, tears finally filling her eyes. I can't take your money. You're not taking it. I'm giving it. Jenna pulled out her phone. By tomorrow afternoon, you'll have a house, good school district, safe neighborhood, in your name so Kevin can't touch it. And I'm transferring enough for expenses until you figure out next steps. Jenna, no. That's too much. Maya, I just inherited $2 billion. Let me help you. Maya started crying then, the kind that comes from months of holding everything together. Jenna held her while she sobbed and felt her own anger at Glenn grow sharper. This is what men like Glenn and Kevin did. They planned exits, they secured futures, and they left women scrambling to survive. They stayed up all night talking. Maya told stories about Kevin that sounded exactly like Glenn's playbook. The emotional withdrawal, making her feel like she was imagining problems, accusing her of paranoia when she asked about money. They're all the same, Maya said as the sun rose. Different faces, same strategy. Glenn's about to learn that leaving doesn't mean winning, Jenna said, then told her sister everything. The inheritance, the trust fund, Barbara's confession, Britt's investigation. Maya listened with growing amazement. You're going to destroy him, Maya said. I'm going to make sure he understands what he threw away. The kids woke around 7. Jenna ordered breakfast, let them watch cartoons, made calls for the house and transfers. Maya cried when she saw the numbers, but this time it was relief mixed with disbelief. I'll pay you back, Maya said. I don't want you to pay me back. I want you to build a life where you never need anyone's permission to be safe. 2 days later, Maya and the kids were settled in a 3-bedroom house. Jenna had hired a lawyer for Maya's divorce, paid the retainer, made sure Kevin would get nothing he wasn't entitled to. Jenna was at her grandmother's office when her phone rang. Unknown number. Jenna? Maya sounded tense. Something just happened. Someone just left. Glenn's lawyer. Jenna went still. Richard Browning came to your house? Yes. He knew where I was. He said he was concerned about your mental state. Said sudden wealth causes psychological problems. Asked if I'd noticed changes in your behavior. What did you tell him? I said you were fine and he should leave. But he kept pushing. Said Glenn's family is worried. Said they want to make sure you're advised properly. And then he offered me money, $200,000 to testify you've been acting unstable, that you're making irrational decisions, that you're not equipped to handle the inheritance. Jenna's hand tightened on the phone. What did you say? I told him I was recording the conversation. He left pretty quickly after that. You were actually recording? Yes. You told me about Britt recording Glenn. I figured if Glenn's lawyer showed up, I should protect myself. I got the whole thing. Him offering money, coaching me on what to say, all of it. Jenna felt hope mixed with pride. Maya, you just gave me the last piece I needed. For what? To prove Glenn and his lawyers are willing to commit fraud for part of my inheritance. With your recording, I can prove it's manufactured. Why come to me, though? Because you're my sister. Family testimony carries weight, and they probably thought you'd be vulnerable. A woman whose husband just left, struggling with money, afraid. They thought you'd be an easy target. Maya was quiet. They thought wrong. Yes, they did. Can you send me that recording? Already done. After they hung up, Jenna listened 3 times. Richard Browning's voice was smooth, professional, carefully not threatening while making the threat clear. We're prepared to compensate you for your time and testimony. $200,000 is significant. All we need is for you to be honest about your concerns regarding your sister's recent behavior. But Maya's response was perfect. I'm recording this. I suggest you leave my property before I call the police and report witness tampering. Jenna sent it to Lawrence with a message. They just made a huge mistake. Glenn's lawyer tried to bribe my sister. We have it on tape. Lawrence called back within 5 minutes. This is grounds for disbarment and criminal prosecution. Richard Browning just destroyed his career and potentially put himself in prison. Can we use it? Can we use it? Jenna, this is the nuclear option. If we introduce this, Glenn doesn't just lose the divorce. Richard faces criminal charges. This ends everything. Good. Let's end it. Once we play this card, there's no negotiation, no settlement, just complete destruction. Jenna thought about Glenn's freedom speech, the trust fund, Barbara's racism, Britt pretending to love Glenn for 6 months, Kevin leaving Maya with nothing, all the men who thought they could discard women and walk away clean. I'm sure, she said. Play the card. That night, Jenna drove to Maya's house. After the kids were asleep, the sisters sat on the back porch with tea. Thank you, Maya said quietly. For everything. The house, the money, believing me. No one else believed me. Everyone thought I was paranoid. I believe you because I lived it. Glenn told me I was imagining things too. That's what they do. They make us doubt ourselves until they're ready to leave. Do you think we'll ever trust anyone again? I think we'll trust people who earn it. And we'll never accept less than we deserve just because we're afraid of being alone. Maya looked at her sister. You've changed since Glenn left. You're different. I'm the same person. I'm just done pretending to be smaller than I am so men don't feel threatened. Glenn's going to regret leaving you. Glenn already regrets leaving me. He's about to regret it even more. Maya reached over and took Jenna's hand. Whatever you're planning, whatever happens in court, I want you to know I'm proud of you. Mom would be proud too. Mom would tell me to take the high road and forgive everyone. Maybe. But Mom spent her whole life taking the high road, and where did it get her? Dead too young and estranged from her own mother because she refused to fight. Sometimes the high road is just another way of letting people walk all over you. Jenna squeezed her sister's hand. Glenn's lawyer thought you'd be easy to manipulate. Everyone always thinks we're easy to manipulate, right up until they realize they've made a mistake. Are you scared of testifying? Terrified. But I'm more afraid of teaching my kids that it's okay to let people hurt you without fighting back. I'm more afraid of showing them that women should accept whatever men decide to give. Maya smiled, the first real smile Jenna had seen since she'd shown up in the parking garage. So yes, I'll testify. I'll tell the court exactly what Richard Browning said and how he tried to pay me to lie. And then I'm going to watch Kevin's face when he realizes my sister is a billionaire who's making sure I never need him for anything ever again. Jenna drove home thinking about family, about loyalty, about how women were supposed to support each other through men's betrayals. Maya had chosen her side. She'd been offered money to betray Jenna, and she'd recorded the offer instead. Glenn and his lawyers had thought Maya would be vulnerable. They'd thought $200,000 would be enough to make her commit perjury. They'd thought wrong, and that miscalculation was about to cost Glenn Adam everything. Back at her hotel, Jenna received a text from an unknown number. This is Richard Browning. I apologize for the misunderstanding with your sister today. I was simply trying to ensure we have all perspectives before trial. There's no need for this to become adversarial. Perhaps we can discuss a settlement that works for everyone. Jenna showed the text to Lawrence. He's scared. He should be. He just committed a crime and got caught. Now he's trying to walk it back before it destroys his career and lands him in prison. What should I say? Nothing. Let him panic. Let Glenn panic. Let them realize this isn't just a divorce anymore. This is a reckoning. Jenna didn't respond. She didn't need to. Richard Browning had made his play and lost. Glenn had sent his lawyer to bribe a vulnerable woman, and that woman had been smarter than they expected. The game was almost over. Glenn just didn't know it yet. But he would. Soon enough, he would understand that the woman he'd walked away from wasn't broken by his departure. She'd been freed by it, freed to become something he'd never imagined she could be. And now, there was no going back. Chapter 7. The Sun. No one knew about the young man sitting in Jenna's office looked so much like Glenn that for a moment she couldn't breathe. Same jawline, same eyes, same way of sitting with his shoulders back like he was ready for a fight. But there was something different too, something in his expression that Glenn had never had. pain that had carved itself into features too young to carry it. "My name is Marcus Holloway," he said, and his voice was steady despite the way his hands gripped the arms of the chair. "Glenn Adam is my father, and I can prove it." Lawrence Kincaid sat beside Jenna, his face unreadable. They'd received the call an hour ago. A young man claiming to be Glenn's son, requesting a meeting. Lawrence had run a preliminary background check. Everything indicated this wasn't a scam. "How old are you, Marcus?" Jenna asked gently. 19. I'll be 20 next month." "And your mother?" "Angela Holloway. She died last year, cancer." "I'm sorry." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Don't be. She had a good life despite what Glenn tried to do to us. She made sure I had everything I needed. Education, stability, love. Everything Glenn refused to give." "Tell us the story," Lawrence said, "from the beginning." Marcus pulled out his own folder. He'd come prepared. "My mother met Glenn when she was 23. He was 25. This was before he married you, Mrs. Adam. Before he'd made his fortune. They dated for 8 months. She got pregnant. When she told Glenn, he gave her $10,000 and told her to take care of it. She refused. He told her if she kept the baby, he'd deny it was his. He said no one would believe her. He said he had a future and she wasn't part of it. What did she do? She had me anyway. She worked 3 jobs to support us. She never asked Glenn for anything because she knew he'd just deny it again. But she kept records. Every text message, every email, every check he sent to try to keep her quiet. She documented everything. He sent money. In the beginning, usually with notes telling her to disappear, sometimes with threats about what would happen if she tried to claim he was the father publicly. But after a while, the money stopped. He just pretended we didn't exist. Jenna felt sick. "Did you ever meet him?" "Once, when I was 10. My mother was diagnosed with cancer the first time. She went into remission, but she was scared. She wanted me to know who my father was in case something happened to her, so she took me to his office. We waited 3 hours. When Glenn finally came out, she told him who I was. He looked at me for maybe 5 seconds. Then he told security to escort us out. He said if we ever came back, he'd call the police and have us arrested for harassment." "I'm so sorry, Marcus." "Don't be sorry, Mrs. Adam. My mother was 100 times the parent Glenn ever would have been. She made sure I knew I wasn't a mistake. She made sure I understood that Glenn's rejection said everything about him and nothing about me. She was an incredible woman who built a life for us despite a man who wanted us to disappear." "Why are you here now?" Lawrence asked, his lawyer voice gentle but probing. "Your mother passed. You could have left this alone." "Because Glenn is trying to divorce you for money. Because I've seen the news about the trust fund his father set up. And because I think you should know that Glenn has been denying his own son for 19 years because my mother was black, and admitting he had a child with her would have been bad for his image." The room went silent. "Glenn's father's trust fund had specific conditions," Marcus continued. "One of them was that Glenn had to be married to an appropriate woman for 5 years to access it. I did some research. Richard Adams Sr. defined appropriate very specifically in his estate documents. White, from a good family, socially acceptable. My mother was none of those things, and neither are you, Mrs. Adam. You've done your homework. My mother was a paralegal before she got sick. She taught me to document everything. She taught me that powerful people get away with things because no one challenges them with evidence. So I have evidence. DNA test results proving Glenn is my father. Bank records of the hush money he sent. Emails where he tells my mother he'll destroy her reputation if she ever tries to claim I'm his. Text messages where he calls me a bastard who should have never been born. All of it." "Why bring this to me?" Marcus met her eyes, and Jenna saw something that looked like righteous anger mixed with grief. "Because Glenn threw you away the same way he threw my mother away. Because he's sitting in some lawyer's office right now trying to get a piece of your inheritance while he's got a 19-year-old son he's never acknowledged. And because I want him to look at me in court and realize that every person he's discarded to protect his precious reputation is coming back to testify about exactly who Glenn Adam really is." Lawrence leaned forward. You understand what you're asking for. If you testify, your whole life becomes public. Everyone will know Glenn is your father. Everyone will know he denied you. There's no privacy after this. Good. My mother spent 19 years protecting Glenn's secret because she didn't want to hurt me. But I'm not a child anymore, and I'm not interested in protecting a man who couldn't even look at me when I was 10 years old and trying to understand why my father didn't want me. Have you tried to contact him recently? Jenna asked. I sent him a letter after my mother died. I told him she was gone. I told him I wasn't asking for anything. I just wanted him to know. He had his lawyer send me a cease and desist order. Marcus's voice finally cracked. My mother died, and he sent lawyers. Jenna reached across the desk, took Marcus's hand. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Are you going to use what I'm offering? Are you going to make him pay? Yes, Jenna said without hesitation, but not because I want revenge, because you deserve to be acknowledged. You deserve for Glenn to stand in front of a judge and admit that you exist, that you're his son, that he abandoned you because acknowledging you would have cost him money and status. Marcus nodded, wiping at his eyes with his free hand. My mother used to say that the truth always comes out eventually, that people like Glenn can run from consequences for a while, but eventually everything catches up. I want to be there when it catches up to Glenn. I want him to see my face and remember what he did. Lawrence started taking notes. We'll need all your documentation. The DNA test will need to be verified by an independent lab. Your testimony will need to be prepared carefully. Glenn's lawyers will try to discredit you, claim your mother was lying, claim you're after money. Let them try. I have my mother's entire file, every piece of evidence she collected for 19 years. She might have protected his secret while she was alive, but she made sure I had the proof to destroy him if I ever needed to. They spent the next 2 hours going through Marcus's evidence. It was overwhelming. Angela Holloway had been meticulous. She'd kept every text message, every email, every bank deposit. She'd kept a journal documenting every time Marcus asked about his father and what she told him. She'd kept photos of Glenn from newspapers and magazines, dated and filed, showing his rise in business and society while she raised their son alone. Your mother was building a case, Lawrence said, amazement in his voice. She might never have planned to use it, but she was building an airtight legal case. She was a paralegal. She knew how evidence worked, and she wanted to make sure if anything ever happened to her, I'd have proof. She used to say, documentation is protection. She said powerful people rely on other people not having receipts. When Marcus finally left, promising to return with original documents for verification, Jenna sat in silence with Lawrence. Glenn has a son, she said quietly. A son he's been denying for 19 years. A black son. From a relationship that would have cost him his father's approval and his inheritance if it had been public. Glenn chose money and status over his own child. Do we tell him, before the trial, give him a chance to what? Apologize? Make it right? What do you want to do? Jenna thought about Marcus's face when he talked about his mother, about the 10-year-old boy who'd been escorted out of his father's office by security, about Angela Holloway working 3 jobs while Glenn was building his empire, about a woman who died without ever getting an acknowledgement from the man who'd fathered her child. No, she said, we don't tell him. He walks into that courtroom expecting a standard divorce proceeding, and then Marcus walks in, and Glenn has to face what he did in front of a judge, in front of lawyers, in front of everyone. He doesn't get to prepare. He doesn't get to spin it. He just has to sit there and face the son he threw away. That's brutal, Jenna. So is telling a 10-year-old boy that his father doesn't want him. So is sending a cease and desist letter when your son tells you his mother died. Glenn made his choices. Now he gets to live with them. That night, Jenna couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Marcus, about a 19-year-old carrying the weight of his father's rejection, about Angela Holloway dying without ever getting justice, about Glenn walking through life pretending Marcus didn't exist while that boy grew up wondering why he wasn't good enough for his own father to love him. She got up, went to her grandmother's office, and looked at the photo of her mother and Margaret. Two women who'd been estranged because of pride and stubbornness. Two women who'd missed years they could have had together because neither one knew how to bend. But Margaret had tried to make it right in the end. She'd given Jenna weapons. She'd given her power. She'd given her a chance to fight back. Angela Holloway had done the same thing for Marcus. She'd spent 19 years collecting evidence, building a case, making sure her son would have the truth even after she was gone. Both women had died without seeing justice. But their children were still here. And their children were about to make sure Glenn Adam understood that discarding people has consequences. Jenna sent Marcus a text. "Your mother would be proud of you." His response came back immediately. "I hope so. She deserved better than what he gave her. They all do." They all do meant more than Angela Holloway. It meant Jenna. It meant Maya. It meant every woman Glenn and men like him had ever underestimated, discarded, or tried to erase. Tomorrow, they'd start preparing Marcus's testimony. They'd verify the DNA evidence. They'd build the case that would force Glenn to publicly acknowledge the son he'd spent 19 years denying. And Glenn, sitting somewhere with his lawyers, planning his strategy for getting a piece of Jenna's inheritance, had no idea that his biggest secret was about to walk into court and destroy everything he'd built on lies. Chapter 8. The Courtroom Resurrection. The courtroom was packed, which almost never happened for divorce proceedings. Word had gotten out somehow. Maybe Glenn's lawyers had leaked information, trying to build public sympathy. Maybe reporters had smelled blood in the water. Either way, the gallery was full of people who'd come to watch a billionaire's divorce turn into a spectacle. Glenn sat at his table looking confident. He'd lost weight. He'd changed his suit style. He was trying to look humbled, sympathetic, like a man who'd made an honest mistake and was trying to make it right. Richard Browning sat beside him, though he looked significantly less comfortable than Glenn did. The attempted bribery of Maya had shaken him, but he was still here, still fighting. Jenna sat at her table with Lawrence Kincaid and a team of 3 other lawyers. She wore a navy suit, her hair pulled back, looking calm and professional. Inside, her heart was racing. Judge Hawthorne entered, and everyone rose. She'd read the preliminary filings. She knew this wasn't going to be a standard proceeding. She sat, arranged her papers, and looked directly at Glenn. "Mr. Adam, I've reviewed the new evidence presented by Mrs. Adams' legal team. The allegations are serious. Before we proceed, I want to give you an opportunity to address them. Did you know about your father's trust fund when you filed for divorce?" Richard Browning stood. "Your Honor, my client—" "I asked Mr. Adam directly, Counselor. Mr. Adam, did you know?" Glenn stood slowly. He'd practiced this. Jenna could see it, the slight hesitation, the careful vulnerability in his expression. "Your Honor, I was informed of the trust fund's existence by my father's estate attorney, but the trust was one factor among many complex personal decisions. My marriage had been troubled for some time." "When were you informed of the trust fund's conditions?" "Several months before I filed for divorce." "How many months?" Glenn shifted his weight. "Approximately 8 months, Your Honor." "And in those 8 months you attended marriage counseling with your wife?" "No, Your Honor." "You discussed your concerns with your wife?" "Not explicitly." "So you were informed that you could access $20 million by divorcing your wife, and you spent 8 months planning to do exactly that without ever informing her of the financial incentive. Is that accurate?" "Your Honor, it wasn't that simple." "It seems quite simple from where I'm sitting, Mr. Adam. But let's move on. Mrs. Adams' team has submitted additional evidence. Mr. Kincaid, you may present your first witness." Lawrence stood. "Your Honor, the petitioner calls Brittany Chen." Glenn's head snapped up. He looked at his lawyer in confusion. Richard Browning's face went pale. They hadn't expected this. Britt walked in wearing a professional suit, her hair down, looking nothing like the Instagram girlfriend Glenn had been showing off months ago. She was sworn in and took the stand. "Ms. Chen, can you please describe your relationship with Mr. Adam?" Lawrence asked. I was hired by attorney David Russo to investigate Mr. Adams' business practices. Mr. Adam believed I was his girlfriend. In reality, I was documenting evidence of fraud and embezzlement for a civil case. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hawthorne slammed her gavel. Glenn looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. His mind was reeling. Britt wasn't real. The girl he'd been showing off, the girl who'd made him feel young and successful, had been investigating him the entire time. Every conversation, every dinner, every moment he'd thought he was winning, all of it had been a trap. "You were never actually dating Mr. Adam?" Lawrence asked. "No, I was working undercover. Mr. Adam believed our relationship was romantic because that's what I allowed him to believe. In reality, I was recording our conversations and documenting his admissions of criminal activity." "Objection!" Richard jumped to his feet. "This testimony is prejudicial and irrelevant to divorce proceedings." "Your Honor," Lawrence said calmly, "Ms. Chen's testimony is directly relevant to establishing Mr. Adams' character and his pattern of deception, which goes to the question of whether he entered this divorce in good faith." "I'll allow it for now. Continue, Mr. Kincaid." Lawrence had Britt walk through her investigation. Glenn's admissions of hiding money from business partners, his confessions of moving assets to offshore accounts, his bragging about outsmarting people who trusted him. Every recorded conversation was played. Glenn's voice filled the courtroom, cocky and self-satisfied, explaining exactly how he'd been committing fraud. Glenn sat frozen, listening to his own voice betray him. He wanted to object, to explain, to make them understand that he'd been drunk during some of those conversations, that Britt had manipulated him, that none of this was fair. But he couldn't speak. His throat had closed. He could barely breathe. By the time Britt stepped down, Glenn looked like he wanted to disappear. Richard was whispering frantically to him, trying to do damage control, but the damage was done. The court had heard Glenn in his own words admitting to crimes. "Your Honor," Lawrence said, "the petitioner calls Maya Sandler Burke." Maya walked in, and Jenna felt a surge of pride. Her sister looked strong, composed, ready. She was sworn in and sat down. "Mrs. Burke, you're Jenna Adams' sister, correct?" "Yes." "Can you describe a recent interaction you had with Mr. Richard Browning, Mr. Adams' attorney?" Maya looked directly at Richard Browning. "He came to my house and offered me $200,000 to testify that my sister was mentally unstable and not competent to manage her inheritance." More chaos in the courtroom. Judge Hawthorne didn't even bother with her gavel this time. She just waited for the noise to die down, then looked at Richard Browning with an expression that could have frozen water. "Is this true, Mr. Browning?" Richard stood shakily. "Your Honor, there was a misunderstanding. I was simply trying to gather information." "Mrs. Burke, do you have evidence of this alleged bribery attempt?" "Yes, Your Honor. I recorded the conversation." Maya pulled out her phone. The recording was played. Richard Browning's smooth voice offering money, explaining exactly what Maya should say, coaching her on how to make Jenna look incompetent. When it finished, Judge Hawthorne looked at Richard like she was deciding whether to hold him in contempt immediately or wait until later. "Mr. Browning, you're an officer of this court. You've just been caught on tape attempting to suborn perjury and commit witness tampering. These are criminal offenses. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney immediately and to the Bar Association. You're suspended from participating in this proceeding effective immediately. Mr. Adam, you need new representation." "Your Honor," Glenn finally found his voice. "I had no knowledge of this. I never authorized." "Mr. Adam, your lawyer doesn't attempt to bribe witnesses without client knowledge or approval. Don't insult my intelligence." "Mrs. Burke, thank you for your courage in recording that conversation and bringing it to the court's attention. You may step down." Maya walked past Glenn's table. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. He'd lost, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. "Mr. Kincaid, do you have additional witnesses?" the judge asked. "One more, Your Honor. The petitioner calls Marcus Holloway." Glenn's face went from pale to grey. He grabbed his table, knuckles white. No, that's not possible." "Who is Marcus Holloway?" Judge Hawthorne asked. Mr. Holloway is Mr. Adams' son, Your Honor. I don't have a son, Glenn said, standing up without permission. This is ridiculous. I don't have a son. Sit down, Mr. Adam, the judge said sharply. Mr. Holloway, please approach. Marcus walked in, and the resemblance was undeniable. Same face, same walk, same everything, except Marcus had something Glenn didn't have: moral courage. Glenn felt the room spinning. Marcus, his son, the mistake he'd buried for 19 years, the secret he'd paid to keep hidden, was walking into this courtroom. How did Jenna know? How did she find him? This couldn't be happening. This was his worst nightmare, materializing in front of cameras and reporters, and a judge who already hated him. Marcus was sworn in and took the stand. Mr. Holloway, you claim to be Mr. Adams' son? I am Mr. Adams' son. I have DNA evidence to prove it. And Mr. Adam has never acknowledged you. No, Your Honor. My father has denied my existence for 19 years. He sent money to keep my mother quiet. He's threatened legal action if we ever went public. When I was 10 years old, he had security escort me out of his office, and when my mother died last year, he sent me a cease and desist letter. Glenn sat in silence for a long moment. His whole life was collapsing in real time. Inside his mind, everything was screaming. This couldn't be happening. Marcus, his son, the mistake he'd buried for 19 years, was sitting 15 feet away, telling a judge about the cease and desist letter. Britt, the girl he'd shown off to his friends, the girl who'd made him feel young and powerful, had been recording him the entire time. His own mother's racism was on tape. The trust fund his father created specifically to get rid of Jenna was now public record. Every secret, every lie, every calculation he'd made to protect his image was being stripped away in front of cameras and reporters. He felt his throat closing. His hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the table to hide it. This was supposed to be a simple divorce, a clean exit. He'd practiced the speech. He'd done everything right. How had it all gone so catastrophically wrong? He looked at Jenna and finally understood. She'd been 10 steps ahead the entire time. While he'd been rehearsing his freedom, she'd been building his prison. Finally, barely audible, he said, "Yes." "Is this true, Mr. Adam?" Judge Hawthorne asked. "Is this young man your son?" Glenn sat in silence for a long moment, then finally, "Yes." "And you've never acknowledged him?" "His mother and I had a brief relationship. She got pregnant. I offered to help financially if she kept it private. She agreed." "She agreed because you threatened her," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "She agreed because you told her no one would believe her. She agreed because she was terrified of what you'd do if she didn't." "Mr. Holloway, I'm sorry," Judge Hawthorne said gently, "but please let the attorneys ask the questions. Mr. Adam, why did you deny your son?" Glenn looked at Jenna for the first time, really looked at her. She saw the moment he realized that she'd known about all of this, that she'd planned every reveal, that she'd orchestrated his complete destruction. "I was young," Glenn said weakly. "I made mistakes." "You were young 19 years ago," the judge said. "What about last year when your son contacted you after his mother died? Were you still young then?" Glenn had no answer. "Your Honor," Lawrence said, "Mr. Adams' pattern is clear. He abandons people when it's financially convenient. He denied his son because a black child would have cost him his inheritance. He divorced my client after learning about her inheritance, but before it was finalized, hoping to claim community property rights. He's been hiding assets and committing fraud while presenting himself as a successful businessman. He attempted to have his lawyer bribe a witness to commit perjury. Glenn Adam is not a victim of bad timing. He's a calculating fraud who's been caught." Judge Hawthorne looked at Glenn with something close to disgust. "Mr. Adam, in 20 years on the bench, I have never seen such a comprehensive display of bad faith, deception, and moral bankruptcy. You divorced your wife to access a racist trust fund while she was days away from inheriting a fortune. You've denied your own son for 19 years to protect your image. You've committed business fraud, and you've attempted to suborn perjury through your attorney. Your Honor, I can explain. I don't want to hear it. Here's my ruling. Mrs. Adam receives 100% of her inheritance as separate property. You receive nothing from it, not $1. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mrs. Adam compensatory damages from your assets for emotional distress and fraud. I'm ordering you to pay child support retroactively for Marcus Holloway for all 19 years you denied him, plus reparations for emotional damages. I'm referring your business practices to the district attorney for criminal investigation, and I'm ordering you to pay all legal fees for Mrs. Adam and for Mr. Holloway. Glenn just sat there, every word landing like a physical blow. Furthermore, Judge Hawthorne continued, I'm issuing a restraining order. You're not to contact Mrs. Adam, Mrs. Burke, Ms. Chen, or Mr. Holloway. Any violation will result in immediate incarceration. This divorce is granted. Mrs. Adam is free. You, Mr. Adam, are going to spend the foreseeable future dealing with the consequences of every terrible decision you've made. We're adjourned. The gavel came down with a finality that seemed to echo forever. Jenna stood slowly. Marcus was leaving the witness stand, looking shell-shocked. She walked over to him, put her arms around him, and he broke down crying. 19 years of rejection, of wondering why he wasn't good enough, of watching his father pretend he didn't exist. It all came out in sobs that shook his whole body. You were always good enough, Jenna whispered. He was never good enough for you. Glenn tried to leave through a side door, but reporters were everywhere. His life was over, not just the divorce, everything. His business would be investigated. His reputation was destroyed. His son, the son he'd denied, was embraced by his ex-wife in front of everyone while Glenn slunk away alone. Barbara Adams sat in the gallery, having watched her son's complete destruction. She caught Jenna's eye as she was leaving. There was no hatred there. Just a hollow recognition that this was exactly what Margaret Sandler had planned, a reckoning so complete that there was no recovery. Outside the courthouse, Jenna stood with Lawrence, Maya, Britt, and Marcus, a family built from the wreckage Glenn had left behind. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now? Jenna looked at the young man who shared Glenn's face, but none of his character. Now we build something better than what Glenn tried to destroy. All of us. Chapter 9. The Empire Decision. The offer sat on Jenna's desk like a test she wasn't sure how to answer. Glenn's assets, liquidated. His company, his properties, his cars, his art collection. Everything being sold to pay the judgment against him. The total came to $43 million after legal fees and penalties. The court had ordered it all paid to Jenna and Marcus as restitution. Lawrence had presented the paperwork with his typical efficiency, but then he'd said something that stuck with her. This is more money than most people see in a lifetime. But for you, it's pocket change compared to your inheritance. You could donate it, you could burn it, you could give it to Glenn's victims. This is about what you want your legacy to be. Legacy. The word haunted Jenna. She stood in her grandmother's private office, looking at the photo of Margaret and her mother, two women who'd let pride destroy their relationship, two women who'd both died with regrets they couldn't fix. Jenna didn't want that kind of legacy. She made a list, actually wrote it out by hand the way her mother used to make grocery lists, careful and thoughtful. Marcus. $50 million from her own inheritance, not from Glenn's assets, a trust fund that would mature over time, encouraging him to build his own career rather than living off family money, full funding for college, graduate school, whatever education he wanted, and something his father had never given him: acknowledgement. Jenna had already arranged for a press conference where she'd introduce Marcus as her stepson and announce the foundation being created in Angela Holloway's name. Maya, $20 million, plus full ownership of a property management company Jenna was purchasing. Not charity, opportunity. Maya had already shown she wanted to work, wanted to build something. Now she'd have the resources to do it. David Russo, the full amount Glenn owed him, plus interest, plus damages. Glenn had stolen his company. Jenna was making him whole. Britt. A full-ride scholarship to law school and a job offer at Lawrence Kincaid's firm after graduation. The girl who'd spent 6 months pretending to love Glenn to expose him deserved better than being defined by that investigation. The remaining money from Glenn's assets went into a foundation, the Freedom Fund, she'd call it, money specifically for women leaving financially abusive marriages, legal fees, moving expenses, therapy, job training, everything a woman needed to escape a man who'd used money as a weapon. And Glenn? Glenn kept nothing except his father's $20 million trust fund, the one he'd divorced. Jenna, to access. The racist money that had cost him everything else. He could keep that. Let him live off his father's bigotry. Let that be the only thing he had left. But Jenna had one more move, one last piece that would complete the transformation from victim to victor. She called the CEO she'd hired to run Glenn's old company, the one Jenna now owned completely. A woman named Rachel Torres, brilliant and ruthless, who'd been waiting years for an opportunity like this. "I want you to offer Glenn a job," Jenna said. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "You want me to offer him a job at the company he used to own?" "Not a good job, not executive. I want you to offer him junior analyst, entry level, the kind of position where he has to come in early, stay late, answer to people who used to answer to him, the kind of job where he has to work." "Why?" "Because I want him to have a choice. He can take the job and rebuild his career from the bottom. Actually work for something instead of coasting on his father's name. Or he can refuse and spend the rest of his life explaining why he's unemployable. Either way, he has to face what he became." "What if he takes it? What if he actually accepts the position? Then maybe there's hope for him. Maybe he learns something. Maybe he becomes a better person. And if he doesn't, if he quits or fails, then at least we gave him a chance he never gave his own son." The press conference happened on a Tuesday morning, and the room was packed with reporters who'd been following the divorce saga. Jenna stood at the podium with Marcus beside her. They'd agreed on what to say, how to frame it. This wasn't about Glenn's destruction. This was about building something new. "My name is Jenna Sandler," she said, deliberately using her maiden name. "Many of you know me as Glenn Adams' ex-wife, the woman who inherited a fortune the same week he filed for divorce. But I'm not here to talk about Glenn. I'm here to talk about the people he left behind and what we're going to build with what he tried to take from us." She introduced Marcus, told Angela Holloway's story, announced the foundation in her name. $50 million to support single mothers who were raising children alone after being abandoned by men who refused to take responsibility. She announced the Freedom Fund, money for women escaping financial abuse, legal support, therapy, job training, housing assistance, everything she wished had existed for the women Glenn had hurt. She announced scholarships for students like Marcus who'd grown up without fathers because those fathers had chosen money over family. And she announced something that surprised even Lawrence when she'd told him the night before. She was donating $100 million to reform family court systems, better support for abandoned children, faster processing for child support cases, legal resources for people who couldn't afford attorneys like Lawrence Kincaid. "Glenn Adam thought he was leaving me behind," Jenna said to the cameras. "He thought he was walking away into freedom while I'd be left with nothing. Instead, he walked away from a woman who was about to become powerful enough to change systems that let men like him escape consequences. He walked away from a woman who was about to have the resources to make sure other women don't suffer the way his victims suffered." A reporter raised her hand. "Mrs. Adam, do you have any message for your ex-husband?" Jenna thought about all the things she could say, the cruel things, the cutting things, the things that would make headlines and trending topics. Instead, she said, "I hope he learns that money can't buy character. I hope he looks at what Marcus could have been if Glenn had been brave enough to be a father. I hope he understands that the life he lost was worth more than any inheritance. But mostly I hope he moves on and builds something better than what he destroyed. Because holding on to hatred doesn't hurt him. It hurts me, and I'm done letting Glenn Adam hurt me." Marcus spoke next, his voice steady despite how nervous he'd been in the car ride over. "My father denied me for 19 years because admitting he had a black son would have cost him money and status. But Jenna didn't just acknowledge me, She embraced me. She gave me something my father never could, a family that chose me rather than rejected me. So to anyone watching who's been rejected by a parent, who's been told they weren't good enough, who's grown up wondering why someone couldn't love them, the problem was never you. It was always them. And there are people in this world who will choose you. You just have to survive long enough to find them. The press conference ended, and they walked out to a crowd of people waiting outside the building. Some were crying, some were holding signs thanking Jenna for the foundations, some were women who recognized themselves in the stories of abandonment and financial abuse. One woman pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She grabbed Jenna's hand and whispered, "My husband left me last month, cleaned out our accounts. I have 3 kids and nowhere to go. Can you really help?" Jenna squeezed her hand back. "Give your information to my assistant. We'll have someone contact you today. You're not alone anymore." The woman sobbed and held on for a moment longer before security gently moved her back. But Jenna saw dozens more faces just like hers. Women who'd been left behind. Women who'd been told they were nothing without their husbands. Women who were one emergency away from losing everything. This was why Margaret had left her the fortune. Not for revenge, for this, for the power to catch people when they fell. Later that night, Jenna sat in her new office, not her grandmother's, but one she'd designed herself. Modern, comfortable, with photos of her mother, her sister's kids, and one new addition, a picture of her and Marcus at the press conference, both of them smiling despite everything that had led them there. Lawrence called with updates. Rachel Torres called. Glenn accepted the job offer. Starts Monday. Junior analyst. And there's more. Richard Browning's case concluded today. He's been disbarred permanently and sentenced to 18 months in prison for witness tampering and attempted subornation of perjury. The DA's office made an example of him. 18 months? He'll serve less with good behavior, but his legal career is over. His firm dropped him, his wife filed for divorce, and he's facing civil suits from every client whose case might have been compromised by his methods. Jenna felt no satisfaction in that, just acknowledgement that consequences had finally caught up. And Glenn taking the job, does he know it's essentially penance? Rachel made it clear, bottom rung, no special treatment. He'll work for people who know exactly who he is and what he did. He said he understood. He said he deserves worse, and he's grateful for the opportunity to prove he can do honest work. Rachel thinks he might actually mean it. Or he's just desperate. Maybe both. But Jenna, here's what matters. Whether Glenn changes or doesn't change, succeeds or fails, that's not your concern anymore. You gave him more grace than he gave his own son. What he does with it is his problem. "How's Marcus?" Lawrence asked. "Adjusting. He moved into the apartment I set up for him. Starts college in the fall. He's talking about maybe law school eventually. Says he wants to help people the way Britt helped us. He's a good kid. Angela raised him right." She did. Better than Glenn deserved. Jenna hung up and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Glenn was probably sitting in an empty apartment, the 20 million from his racist father, his only cushion against complete destitution. Somewhere out there, Barbara was dealing with the social consequences of her son's public destruction. Somewhere out there, Richard Browning was preparing for prison. But here, in this office, with foundations being built and lives being changed, Jenna felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace, not happiness exactly. Peace was different. Peace meant she could sleep without wondering when the next betrayal would come. Peace meant she'd survived and built something better from the wreckage. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "The kids want to know if Uncle Marcus can come to dinner this weekend. They're obsessed with him." Jenna smiled and typed back, "I'll ask him. Tell them he's their cousin, not their uncle." Maya. "They know. They just think uncle sounds cooler." Another text came in, this one from Britt. "First day of law school orientation tomorrow. I'm terrified and excited, and I wanted to say thank you for everything, for believing me when I said I was trying to help." Jenna. "You saved yourself. I just gave you resources. Go be brilliant." One more text. this one from a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Adam, my name is Jennifer. I'm the woman who talked to you after the press conference. Your foundation called me today. They're paying for a lawyer, first month's rent, and therapy for my kids. I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life." Jenna read it 3 times, then saved the number, and replied, "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me something. When you're back on your feet, when you're stable and strong, help the next woman who needs it. That's all I ask. Jennifer, I promise." Jenna set her phone down and looked at the photo of her and Marcus again. Glenn had tried to throw them both away, tried to pretend they didn't exist or didn't matter, but they'd found each other in the wreckage he'd left behind, and together they were building something he'd never understand. A family based on choice instead of obligation. An empire based on helping people instead of exploiting them. Margaret Sandler had left her granddaughter a weapon. Jenna had turned it into a shield for everyone Glenn and men like him had ever hurt, and that, she thought, was the best revenge of all. Not destroying Glenn. That had been necessary, but it wasn't the victory. The victory was this, using his betrayal as fuel to build something so powerful, so good, so transformative, that his absence became the catalyst for change he'd never been brave enough to create himself. Glenn had wanted freedom. He'd gotten it. Freedom from his marriage, from his responsibilities, from everyone who'd ever expected him to be better than he was. But Jenna had gotten something better than freedom. She'd gotten power, and she was using every bit of it to make sure the next woman who got divorced by a coward had resources Glenn had tried to deny her. Tomorrow she'd meet with the Freedom Fund team. Next week she'd visit the first Angela Holloway Scholarship recipients. Next month she'd testify before Congress about family court reform. But tonight, she'd sit in her office and remember the woman she'd been when Glenn delivered his freedom speech. The woman who'd believed she was losing everything. The woman who'd had no idea she was about to gain more than she'd ever imagined. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone wealthier, someone who'd looked at betrayal and decided it would be the beginning of her story, not the end. Glenn Adam had filed for divorce to free himself. Instead, he'd freed the most dangerous thing he'd ever encountered, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. And Jenna Sandler was just getting started. Chapter 10. The Woman Who Rose. Jenna stood in front of the mirror in her new office building and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because she'd changed physically, though she had. She'd stopped apologizing for taking up space, stopped making herself smaller to make others comfortable. But because the woman in the mirror had a confidence that came from surviving the worst thing she could imagine and discovering she was stronger than the thing that tried to break her. 18 months had passed since that courtroom. 18 months of building, creating, transforming pain into purpose. The Angela Holloway Foundation had helped over 2,000 single mothers. The Freedom Fund had funded escapes for 300 women leaving abusive marriages. Marcus was thriving in college, top of his class, talking about criminal law. Maya's property management company was turning profit. Britt had finished her first year of law school with honors. And Glenn was still working at the company Jenna owned. Rachel Torres reported that he showed up every day, did his work quietly, kept his head down. He'd been offered promotions twice, genuinely earned ones based on performance, and turned them both down. He seemed content to exist in the background, a cautionary tale everyone knew but nobody discussed. Jenna had seen him once, accidentally, in the lobby. He'd looked at her for a long moment, and she'd seen everything in that look. Regret, shame, understanding. Then he'd nodded once and walked away. She hadn't felt triumph in that moment, just a distant sort of closure. Glenn had become small, not because she'd made him small, but because he'd revealed how small he'd always been. Tonight was a gala for the foundations. Major donors, board members, success stories. Jenna wore a dress that cost more than her first car and felt comfortable in it. Wealth had stopped feeling foreign. It was just a tool now. Marcus walked in, looking sharp in his suit. At 20, he'd grown into himself. "Ready for the speeches?" he asked. "Are you?" "Mom always said the truth doesn't need rehearsal. It just needs courage." He smiled. I've got courage now. Took a while, but I found it. The gala was magnificent. The kind of event Jenna used to attend with Glenn, feeling like she didn't belong. Now she owned the room without trying. People wanted her attention, her approval, her investment. But more importantly, they respected her vision. During the speeches, Jenna talked about transformation. 18 months ago, I thought my life was ending. My husband had filed for divorce using a speech he'd practiced in mirrors. He'd walked out thinking he was escaping something ordinary into something extraordinary. Instead, he walked away from the best thing he never appreciated. She paused. But this isn't about Glenn. It's never been about Glenn. It's about every person who's been told they're not enough. Every person who's been left behind. Every person who's had to rebuild from nothing because someone they loved chose selfishness over partnership. This is about proving that being discarded doesn't mean you're disposable. Sometimes it means you're freed to become something the person who left you could never have imagined. Marcus spoke next. My father denied me for 19 years. I grew up wondering what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I good enough for him to love? Then I met Jenna, and she showed me the question was wrong. There was nothing wrong with me. There was something missing in him, the capacity to love people more than he loved money, the courage to do the right thing when it cost him something, the strength to be a father. He gestured to the room, to Jenna, to the community they'd built. He got his inheritance. I got a family that chose me. After the speeches, people lined up to talk to Jenna. Success stories. Women who'd used the Freedom Fund to escape. Single mothers whose children had Angela Holloway scholarships. Men who'd been inspired to do better after hearing Marcus's story. After everyone left, Jenna stood on the balcony overlooking the city. Maya joined her, both sisters quiet for a moment. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Glenn hadn't left? Maya asked. Sometimes. But then I realize I'd probably still be making myself smaller, still be apologizing for existing, still be trying to be enough for someone who'd already decided I wasn't. Kevin called me last week, said he made a mistake, asked if we could try again. Jenna looked at her sister. What did you say? I said I'm not interested in being someone's second choice. I'm not interested in being the woman he comes back to when his exciting new life turns out to be boring. I'm building something now. He can watch from wherever he ended up, but he can't be part of it. Good. They stood together, two women who'd been left behind, and decided being left was the best thing that could have happened to them. Jenna's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on the gala. It looked beautiful. Everything you've built is beautiful. G. Glenn, watching from whatever small life he'd constructed from the ruins of his arrogance. She deleted the message without responding. He didn't get access to her anymore. Not her time, not her attention, not even her anger. He'd become irrelevant, and that was a better ending than any revenge she could have planned. What are you thinking about? Maya asked. I'm thinking that Glenn spent 8 months planning to leave me. He calculated every move, practiced his speech, set up his escape, and in the end, all his planning gave me exactly what I needed, freedom to become this. She gestured to the city, to the building behind them, to everything she'd built. He thought he was the one getting free. He had no idea he was setting me loose. Months later, Jenna sat in a congressional hearing room, testifying about family court reform. Marcus sat behind her. She talked about abandoned children, about women destroyed by financial abuse, about systems that protected men who refused responsibility while punishing women who tried to enforce it. A senator asked her, Ms. Sandler, some people might say you're pushing this agenda because of personal bitterness toward your ex-husband. How do you respond to that? Jenna looked directly at the camera. I'd say that dismissing women's advocacy as bitterness is exactly why we need reform. When a man fights for change after being wronged, he's principled. When a woman does it, she's bitter. I'm not bitter. I'm awake. And I'm using my resources to make sure the next woman who gets divorced by a coward has a fighting chance. My ex-husband tried to deny me. The hearing room erupted in applause. That night, The video went viral. Jenna became a symbol, not just of survival, but of transformation. The woman who'd turned betrayal into a movement. Glenn's name came up occasionally in articles, usually as a footnote. Adam, whose divorce from Sandler sparked her activism, now works at a firm owned by his ex-wife and declined to comment. He'd become a cautionary tale. The man who divorced a fortune. The father who denied his son. The husband who practiced his freedom speech while his wife was about to inherit billions. And Jenna. Jenna had become something he'd never expected. Not just wealthy, not just powerful. She'd become the woman who took his worst act and transformed it into her greatest achievement. She stood in her office late one night, looking at the photo from that first press conference. Her and Marcus, both of them uncertain but determined. They looked so young in that photo, so unaware of everything they were about to build. Now Marcus was in law school, interning with Lawrence Kincaid, preparing to fight for children like him who'd been abandoned. Maya's company was expanding. Britt was graduating law school next month. The foundations were helping thousands, and Glenn was living off his father's racist money, working a job where everyone knew his story, existing in the shadow of what he'd thrown away. Jenna didn't think about him often anymore. When she did, it was with something close to indifference. He'd become background noise in a life that had grown too loud, too bright, too important for him to matter. She looked at her reflection one last time. The woman looking back wasn't the woman Glenn had left. She was someone entirely new, someone forged in betrayal and refined in victory, someone who'd learned that the opposite of love wasn't hate. It was indifference mixed with purpose. Glenn Adam had filed for divorce to free himself. Instead, he'd freed the most dangerous thing he'd ever encountered, a woman with nothing left to lose, everything to gain, and the resources to change the world. And Jenna Sandler had changed it. One foundation at a time, one woman at a time, one life at a time. She walked out of her office into the night, leaving the lights on behind her. Tomorrow, she'd meet with more advocates. Next week, she'd launch another initiative. Next month, she'd testify in another hearing. But tonight, she'd go home and celebrate something Glenn would never understand. She'd survived him. More than that, she'd become legendary because of him. The man who'd practiced his freedom speech in mirrors had no idea he was releasing a woman who would make sure no one would ever forget his name. Not as the man who got away, but as the man who lost everything by not understanding what he had. And somewhere in the city, Glenn Adam probably lay awake, wondering how the woman he'd dismissed had become unstoppable while he'd become invisible. But Jenna didn't wonder about Glenn at all anymore. She had empires to build, lives to change, and a future so bright that her past with him looked like nothing more than a prologue to a story he was never important enough to finish.